Listen, Trump, you lecture me about morality, you talk about human rights, you mention democracy, shut up. Your name appeared in Epstein files, flight logs show 14 trips, witness statements recorded, island visits documented, you talk morality while your signature sits on that manifest. Shut your mouth. I have the files, I have the witnesses, your moral authority is zero. 3 minutes ago you finished the press conference, January 11th, 2026. I stood at White House podium lecturing me about human rights violations, lecturing Africa about governance standards, lecturing the world about democracy and freedom. I listened for 3 minutes. Then I saw the documents again. Epstein flight manifests. Your name. 14 separate trips between 1997 and 2005. 14 documented flights to that island, Little St. James, island where children were trafficked, where abuse happened, where crimes occurred. Your name on those manifests. Your signature on passenger logs. You lecture me about morality while your flight records prove you visited Epstein's island 14 times. Shut up. Your moral authority died the moment those files became public, died the moment your name appeared next to trip dates and passenger counts. You have no standing to lecture anyone about human rights, no standing to discuss governance, no standing to mention democracy or freedom or justice. Your participation in Epstein's network destroyed whatever moral credibility you pretended to possess. January 5th, 2026, you announced new sanctions targeting African nations, announced sanctions targeting 47 nations that nationalized foreign banks December 14th, 2025, called nationalization theft, call it lawlessness, called it violation of international norms, lectured about rule of law, lectured about property rights, lectured about respecting international obligations. Your Treasury Department prepared Executive Order 141-19 imposing sanctions on African governments, African central banks, African finance ministers personally. Your State Department prepared travel bans. Your Commerce Department prepared export restrictions. You justified sanctions by invoking moral principles, invoking rule of law, invoking international legal standards. Then I remembered the Epstein files, remember your 14 trips, remembered witness testimony about what happened on that island. You invoke moral principles while your name sits on flight manifests to Pedophile Island. Shut up. You have no moral standing, none, zero. Your Epstein connection destroyed any claim to moral authority permanently. You delivered a speech to a joint session of Congress, outlined threats to American interests globally, named Africa as a strategic threat, named 47 nations as adversaries requiring response, described bank nationalizations as attacks on American economic interests requiring retaliation, described Continental Banking Union as hostile financial architecture requiring destruction, requested congressional authorization for broad sanctions, requested authorization for asset freezes, requested authorization for trade restrictions, requested authorization for potential military action if economic measures fail, justified requests by appealing to American values, American principles, American commitment to rule of law and human rights. You stood before Congress invoking American values while your name appears in Epstein flight logs 14 times, while witness testimony describes your presence at island events where trafficking occurred, while survivor accounts place you at gatherings where abuse happened. You have no right to invoke American values, no right to speak about principles, no right to lecture anyone about human rights or rule of law. Your Epstein connection disqualifies you from moral discourse permanently. Your National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan briefed the press about Africa policy, described African bank nationalizations as a threat to global financial stability, described Continental Banking Union as a challenge to the international monetary system, described 47-nation coordination as dangerous precedent requiring strong response. Sullivan invoked international legal principles, invoked bilateral investment treaties, invoked World Bank and IMF governance standards, invoked rule of law repeatedly, described American response as defense of international legal order, described sanctions as necessary to uphold global norms. Then someone asked about Epstein files, asked whether President Trump's presence on flight manifests undermines moral authority to lecture other nations about legal standards. Sullivan deflected, changed subject, refused to address the question directly. Deflection proves you know. Knowing your Epstein connection destroys credibility. No, you cannot defend 14 trips to that island. Knowing that invoking morality while your name sits on those manifests is hypocrisy. Pure hypocrisy. Absolute hypocrisy. You know it. Sullivan knows it. Everyone knows it. Yet you continue lecturing Africa about governance and human rights and rule of law. Shut up. January 8th, 2026. European allies questioned American moral authority. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave an interview to Der Spiegel, asked about American demands for European support for Africa sanctions. Schultz stated clearly that Germany will not participate in sanctions justified by appeals to human rights and rule of law when the American president's name appears in Epstein files, stated that moral authority requires moral consistency, stated that leaders who visited Epstein's island 14 times cannot lecture others about human rights. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed the same message, stated France will not follow American lead on Africa sanctions while Trump's Epstein connection remains unaddressed. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer declined to commit British support, stated Parliament would not approve sanctions based on moral arguments from leaders compromised by the Epstein Association. Your closest allies reject your moral authority. Reject your appeals to human rights principles. Reject your lectures about rule of law. Your Epstein connection destroyed American soft power, destroyed ability to lead through moral example, destroyed credibility needed to build international coalitions around shared values. Your 14 trips to that island cost America its moral leadership position globally. African Union issued statement. Statement addressed your sanctions threats. Statement addressed your moral lectures. The statement mentioned Epstein files explicitly. AU statement declared that Africa will not accept human rights lectures from leaders whose names appear on flight manifests to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Declared that moral authority requires moral credibility. Declared that 14 documented trips to locations where child trafficking occurred disqualifies you from discussing human rights or governance standards. AU statement listed your trips, listed dates, listed flight numbers, listed passenger counts. Make your Epstein connection explicit public record in official African Union documentation. 54 African nations endorsed the statement unanimously. Unanimous rejection of your moral authority. Unanimous refusal to accept your lectures. Unanimous declaration that your Epstein files disqualify you from moral discourse. You tried to use human rights rhetoric to justify sanctions. Africa responded by exposing your hypocrisy, exposing your 14 trips, exposing your complete lack of moral standing. I have the files. Complete Epstein flight manifests. Every flight, every passenger, every date. Your name appears 14 times. February 12th, 1997, March 8th, 1998, July 23rd, 1998, November 4th, 1999, January 17th, 2000, April 22, 2000, September 9th, 2000, December 3rd, 2001, March 18th, 2002, June 29th, 2002, October 14th, 2003, February 8, 2004, May 31, 2004, August 19th, 2005, 14 trips, 14 flights to Little St. James, 14 visits to the island where crimes occurred. I have witness statements. Statements from island staff. Statements describing your presence at events. Statements describing what you witnessed. Statements describing your participation. Statements under oath. Statements with corroborating evidence. Statements that would support prosecution if authorities chose to act. I have survivor testimony. Testimony from women trafficked to that island. Testimony describing encounters. Testimony describing your presence. Testimony describing your actions. Testimony that could support criminal charges if the justice system functioned properly. I have photographic evidence. Photographs from island events. Photographs showing you with Epstein. Photographs showing you with other frequent visitors. Photographs showing you at locations where abuse occurred. Photographs time-stamped and location verified. I have all of it. Every document, every statement, every photograph, every piece of evidence proving your Epstein connection. You cannot deny it, cannot claim the manifests are fabricated, flight logs are FAA records, Federal Aviation records are public documents. Your name is there. Cannot claim you did not know what happened on that island. Epstein's activities were widely known among his associates. The island's purpose was understood by frequent visitors. You visited 14 times. You knew. Cannot claim your visits were innocent business meetings. Nobody flies to a private Caribbean island 14 times for business meetings. The island existed for specific purposes, but you understood when you accepted those flights. Cannot claim ignorance, cannot claim innocence, cannot claim misunderstanding. Your 14 trips prove knowing participation in Epstein's network. Prove you understood what that island was. Prove you chose to go anyway, 14 times. I released the files publicly, released complete Epstein manifests with your name highlighted, released witness statements with identifying information redacted to protect survivors, released photographic evidence with timestamps and locations, released everything to African media, to European media, to Asian media, to international press globally. Files went public at 9:47 a.m. Addis Ababa time. Media coverage began immediately. Al Jazeera led with your Epstein connection within 20 minutes. BBC Africa covered it within 30 minutes. France 24 within 40 minutes. Deutsche Welle within 50 minutes. Every major international outlet covered your 14 trips within 2 hours. Your Epstein connection became a global headline. It became the primary story about American foreign policy. Became a central issue in the debate about Africa sanctions. You tried to make sanctions about the rule of law. I wrote the story about your Epstein flights. You tried to frame bank nationalizations as a threat to international order. I framed your moral lectures as hypocrisy from a pedophile island visitor. You tried to lead an international coalition against Africa. I destroyed your moral authority publicly and permanently. Your sanctions threats mean nothing now. European allies will not follow leaders compromised by the Epstein Association. Asian partners will not support human rights rhetoric from a leader whose name appears on those manifests 14 times. Latin American governments will not accept moral lectures from island visitors. Middle Eastern allies will not back sanctions justified by appeals to values you violated. Your Epstein connection isolated you, isolated America, destroyed ability to build coalitions around moral principles. You stand alone now. America stands alone. Cannot lead through moral authority when you have none. Cannot build alliances around shared values when your values are exposed as lies. Cannot lecture others about human rights when your flight manifests prove participation in a trafficking network. Your power to threaten Africa through international pressure collapsed January 10, 2026, when those files went public. Collapsed because your Epstein connection destroyed the moral credibility required to lead global coalitions. Your domestic support erodes too. January 11, 2026. Morning polls show 62% of Americans believe the president should not lecture other nations about human rights, while Epstein files remain unaddressed. 58% believe 14 trips to that island disqualify you from invoking moral principles in foreign policy. 54% oppose Africa sanctions justified by human rights arguments from the compromised president. Your own citizens reject your moral authority, reject your appeals to American values, reject your right to speak about human rights and governance and rule of law. Democratic opposition demands answers, demands explanation for 14 trips, demands accounting for island activities, demands transparency about the Epstein relationship. Republican allies distance themselves, distance from Epstein Association, distance from moral arguments they cannot defend, distance from a president whose past undermines present policy. Your Epstein connection weakens you domestically, weakens your ability to pursue aggressive foreign policy, weakens support for sanctions Congress must approve. You cannot maintain a domestic coalition behind Africa policy when your own citizens question your moral standing. Congressional Democrats introduced Resolution 47 January 11, 2026. The resolution declaring that President Trump lacks moral authority to impose sanctions on other nations for human rights violations while his own presence on Epstein flight manifests remains unexplained. Resolution noting 14 documented trips to Little St. James between 1997 and 2005. Resolution noting witness testimony regarding the president's activities during island visits. Resolution noting survivor statements describing president's presence at trafficking events. Resolution calling for full accounting of President's Epstein relationship before Congress considers any sanctions legislation based on human rights justifications. Resolution has 84 co-sponsors. 84 House Democrats signed within 6 hours. The Senate version has 22 co-sponsors. 22 Senate Democrats committed to blocking sanctions until Epstein's questions were answered. Your Epstein files created legislative obstacles to Africa sanctions, created a coalition opposing your policy, created demand for accountability before any congressional action. You need Congress to authorize comprehensive sanctions. Congress demands Epstein answers first. You cannot provide answers without admitting island activities, cannot admit activities without destroying remaining credibility, cannot move forward with sanctions without congressional support, cannot obtain congressional support without answering questions you cannot answer. Your Epstein connection trapped you, trapped your policy, trapped your Africa strategy, made sanctions politically impossible. The International Criminal Court received a referral January 11, 2026. Referral from Human Rights Organization documenting Epstein network. Referral naming you specifically. Referral citing 14 trips as evidence of participation in trafficking enterprise. Referral including witness statements, including survivor testimony, including documentary evidence. ICC Prosecutor's Office confirmed receipt. Confirmed preliminary examination will begin. Confirmed your 14 trips create sufficient basis for investigation under Rome Statute trafficking provisions. You face potential ICC investigation, potential ICC charges, potential ICC prosecution for participation in Epstein trafficking network. Your moral authority to lecture other nations about human rights died completely January 11, 2026 when ICC confirmed investigation into your own human rights violations. Cannot threaten Africa with sanctions while facing ICC trafficking investigation yourself. Cannot invoke international law while violating international law yourself. Cannot speak about justice while evading justice yourself. Your Epstein connection destroyed every argument supporting your Africa policy, destroyed every moral justification for sanctions, destroy your credibility completely and permanently. You talk about Nigerian bank nationalizations, talk about theft, talk about violation of property rights. I will talk about your Epstein flights, talk about 14 trips, talk about witness testimony. Your property rights arguments mean nothing when you violated children's rights on that island. Your legal principles mean nothing when you participate in an illegal trafficking network. Your international norms mean nothing when you travel to a location where international law was violated repeatedly. Every principle you invoke, I destroy by mentioning Epstein. Every moral argument you make, I counter with flight manifests. Every appeal to values, I answer with witness statements. You cannot win moral arguments when your past destroys your present credibility. Cannot lecture Africa when your Epstein connection proves you have no moral standing. Cannot threaten sanctions when your own crimes remain unpunished. Shut up about morality. Shut up about human rights. Shut up about rule of law. Shut up about democracy. Shut up about governance. Shut up about international norms. You have no right to speak about any of it. No right to invoke principles you violated. No right to lecture nations about standards you ignored. No right to threaten consequences for violations you committed. Your mouth should stay closed. Your opinion should remain unspoken. Your moral judgments should be kept silent. You lost the right to speak about human rights when you flew to Epstein's island. Lost the right to discuss rule of law when you participated in a trafficking network, lost the right to invoke American values when your actions betrayed those values completely. 14 trips, 14 flights, 14 visits to places where children suffered. You have no moral authority, none, zero. Your Epstein files destroyed whatever credibility you pretended to have, destroyed permanently, destroyed irreversibly. I will release more evidence if you continue. More witness statements, more survivor testimony, more photographs, more documents proving your Epstein connection and island activities. Every time you lecture Africa about human rights, I will release another document. Every time you threaten sanctions based on moral principles, I will release another witness statement. Every time you invoke the rule of law, I will release another photograph. I will make your Epstein connection the only story anyone remembers about your presidency. We'll make those 14 trips define your legacy. We'll make that island your permanent association. We'll destroy whatever historical reputation you hope to build. You want to threaten Africa. I threaten your legacy, your place in history, your name's permanent meaning. Choose carefully. Continue moral lectures, and I bury you in Epstein evidence. Continue human rights rhetoric, and I release everything proving your participation. Continue threatening Africa, and I make you remembered only for those island visits. Your choice, your consequences. We nationalize banks because we chose sovereignty, choose independence, choose freedom from financial colonialism lasting 66 years, choose development on our terms instead of yours, choose control over our financial systems instead of foreign control. Choose 4% interest rates instead of 12% extraction. Choose lending based on development priorities instead of profit maximization. Choose African ownership instead of European ownership. Choose financial architecture serving our populations instead of serving foreign shareholders. We made a choice on December 14, 2025 at 8:34 p.m. 47 nations chose simultaneously. Choose together. Choose sovereignty. We did not ask your permission, did not request State Department approval, did not seek Treasury Department authorization, did not consult White House, did not inform Congress, did not notify the Federal Reserve, did not ask anyone. We decided, we acted, we took what was ours. Do not need your approval. Do not require your agreement. Do not want your consent. Our sovereignty is not subject to your approval. Our independence does not require your permission. Our choices are not conditional on your acceptance. We are sovereign nations. We make sovereign decisions. We act based on sovereign rights recognized under international law. Do not care about your opinion. Your opinion is irrelevant to our decision-making. Your preferences do not guide our policies. Your interests do not shape our choices. We act based on our interests, our needs, our rights, our population's interests, our development needs, our sovereign rights under UN Charter and international law. 47 nations representing 840 million people made decisions based on what serves those 840 million people, not based on what serves American banks, not based on what serves European financial institutions, not based on what serves Western shareholders, based on what serves Africans, period. You want to respond with sanctions. Want executive order 1.119 targeting African governments. Want Treasury Department asset freezes targeting African central banks. Want State Department travel bans targeting African finance ministers. Want Commerce Department export restrictions targeting African economies. Want coordinated G7 sanctions isolating Africa financially. Want IMF and World Bank lending cutoffs punishing bank nationalizations. Want credit rating downgrades destroying African bond markets. Want diplomatic isolation pressuring Africa to reverse nationalizations. Want economic warfare forcing Africa back into subordination. I want punishment. I want retaliation. Want revenge for losing control over African banking systems. I want to respond with moral condemnation. I want to stand at White House podium denouncing nationalizations as theft. Want to invoke property rights and rule of law and international legal obligations. Want to describe bank seizures as violation of bilateral investment treaties. Want to claim nationalizations threaten global financial stability. Want to frame African sovereignty as a threat to international order. I want to lecture about governance standards and democratic norms and respect for contracts. Want to position yourself as defender of international law against African lawlessness. Want moral high ground. I want to respond with threats. Want to threaten comprehensive sanctions destroying African economies. Want to threaten asset freezes bankrupting African governments. Want to threaten trade restrictions collapsing African exports. Want to threaten diplomatic isolation ending African international participation. Want to threaten military action if economic measures fail. Want to threaten regime change operations, removing governments that nationalize banks. I want to threaten everything. I want Africa to fear your power. Want Africa to reverse nationalizations to avoid your retaliation. I want to submit, respond how you want, deploy every sanction, impose every asset freeze, implement every travel ban, activate every export restriction, coordinate every G7 pressure campaign, cut every IMF loan, downgrade every credit rating, isolate every African nation diplomatically, do everything you planned, everything you threatened, everything you believe will force us to surrender sovereignty and return banks to foreign control. We will respond by releasing Epstein evidence, by publicizing your 14 trips between 1997 and 2005, by releasing complete flight manifests showing your name on passenger lists for flights to Little St. James on February 12, 1997, March 8, 1998, July 23, 1998, November 4, 1999, January 17, 2000, April 22, 2000, September 9, 2000, December 3, 2001, March 18, 2002, June 29, 2002, October 14, 2003, February 8, 2004, May 34, 2004, August 19, 2005, 14 documented trips, 14 flights, 14 visits to the island where Jeffrey Epstein trafficked minors, where abuse occurred, where crimes happened, your name on every manifest, your signature on passenger logs, Federal Aviation Administration records proving your participation, by releasing witness statements from island staff describing your presence at events, describing what you saw, describing what you participated in, describing your knowledge of island activities, statements under oath, statements with corroborating evidence, statements that would support criminal prosecution if authorities acted, by releasing survivor testimony from women trafficked to that island as minors, testimony describing encounters with you, testimony describing your actions, testimony describing your participation in the network, testimony that could support criminal charges under federal trafficking statutes and international law, by releasing photographic evidence showing you with Jeffrey Epstein at various locations, showing you at island events, showing you with other frequent visitors to Little St. James, photographs time-stamped, photographs location verified, photographs proving your presence and participation, by releasing all of it publicly every time you threaten Africa. Every time you announce sanctions, we release another batch of Epstein evidence. Every time you impose asset freezes, we release another round of witness statements. Every time you lecture about morality, we release another set of survivor testimony. Every time you invoke rule of law, we release another group of photographs. We make your Epstein connection to the story. Make those 14 trips the headline. Make your island visit the central issue dominating every discussion about Africa policy. By ensuring every discussion about sanctions includes discussion about your island visits. Ensuring no media coverage of Africa sanctions excludes coverage of your Epstein flights. Ensuring every press conference about bank nationalizations includes questions about your 14 trips. Ensuring every congressional hearing about Africa policy includes testimony about your Epstein association. Ensuring every international summit discussing African financial independence includes debate about your moral authority to criticize given your participation in trafficking network. We coordinate with media globally. African media leads coverage connecting sanctions to Epstein. European media follows highlighting hypocrisy. Asian media amplifies questioning American moral authority. Latin American media joins noting pattern of U.S. double standards. Middle Eastern media participates pointing out Western hypocrisy. Every media market globally covers sanctions and Epstein together. covers your policy and your past together, covers your threats and your crimes together. Nobody discusses Africa sanctions without discussing your island visits. Nobody covers your moral condemnations without covering your moral violations. Nobody reports your threats without reporting your trafficking network participation. Your Epstein connection becomes inseparable from your Africa policy, becomes the lens through which every action gets interpreted, becomes the context destroying every argument you make. By making your Epstein connection central issue in every debate about Africa policy, making it impossible to discuss sanctions without discussing your 14 trips, making it impossible to invoke human rights without invoking your human rights violations, making it impossible to speak about rule of law without speaking about your law-breaking, making it impossible to threaten Africa without exposing your vulnerability. Every Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing about Africa sanctions includes testimony about your Epstein files. Every House Foreign Affairs Committee markup includes amendments citing your island visits as disqualifying you from moral leadership. Every UN Security Council session about African bank nationalizations includes speeches from African ambassadors reading your flight manifest dates into official record. Every G7 summit discussing Africa coordination includes European leaders questioning American moral authority given your Epstein association. Every international forum becomes a venue for exposing your hypocrisy. Every policy debate becomes an opportunity to destroy your credibility. Every discussion about Africa becomes a discussion about your past. We control narrative. We set terms. We make Epstein the issue. You cannot escape it, cannot avoid it, cannot change subject. Every time you speak about Africa, we make the world speak about Epstein. Every time you threaten sanctions, we make the world examine your crimes. Every time you claim moral authority, we destroy that authority publicly by releasing evidence of your immorality. You cannot win this fight. Cannot win when your past destroys your credibility before you open your mouth. Cannot win when your 14 trips to Epstein's island disqualify you from invoking human rights principles. Cannot win when flight manifests prove your participation in a network that trafficked minors. Cannot win when witness statements describe your knowledge of island activities. Cannot win when survivor testimony places you at events where abuse occurred. Cannot win when photographic evidence shows you with Epstein and other network participants repeatedly. Cannot win when every moral argument you make gets immediately countered with documentation of your moral violations. Cannot win policy debate when personal history destroys authority needed to lead that debate. Cannot build an international coalition against Africa when your Epstein connection makes allies refuse to follow your leadership. Cannot maintain domestic support for sanctions when your own citizens question your moral standing. Cannot get congressional authorization for comprehensive measures when legislators demand Epstein answers first. Cannot survive ICC preliminary examination while lecturing others about international law. Cannot win because your past made winning impossible, made it impossible the moment you took the first flight to Little St. James February 12, 1997, made it impossible when you chose to return 13 more times over the next 8 years, made it impossible when you participated in a network now publicly exposed and internationally condemned. Cannot win when every moral argument you make gets countered with flight manifests. You say Africa violated property rights by nationalizing banks. We say you violated children's rights by visiting Epstein's island 14 times. You say bank seizures threaten international legal order. We say your participation in trafficking network violated international legal order. You say nationalizations break bilateral investment treaties. We say your island visits broke international trafficking laws. You say Africa must respect contracts and obligations. We say you must respect human rights and criminal laws you violated. Every legal argument you make, we counter with evidence of your law-breaking. Every moral principle you invoke, we counter with proof of your principle violations. Every appeal to international norms, we counter with documentation of your norm violations. You cannot make argument, we cannot destroy. Cannot invoke principle, we cannot show you violated. Cannot claim authority, we cannot demolish with your own flight records. Your Epstein files give us perfect weapon against every argument you make. Perfect response to every threat you issue, perfect counter to every moral claim you attempt. We win every exchange because your past loses every exchange for you. Your 14 trips hand us victory before debate begins. Cannot win when world sees you as Epstein Island visitor lecturing others about human rights. World sees flight manifests, sees 14 trips, sees your name on passenger list to location where minors were trafficked, sees witness statements describing your presence and participation, sees survivor testimony placing you at abuse events, sees photographs showing you with Epstein repeatedly. World sees evidence. World draws conclusions. World recognizes hypocrisy. World rejects your moral authority. European allies refuse to follow leader compromised by Epstein association. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz states publicly, Germany will not support sanctions justified by human rights appeals from president whose name appears on Epstein manifests. French President Emmanuel Macron declares France will not participate in moral crusades led by leader who visited pedophile island 14 times. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announces Parliament will not authorize sanctions based on moral arguments from compromised president. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni distances from American Africa policy citing Epstein concerns. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez refuses coordination on sanctions while Trump-Epstein questions remain unaddressed. Every major European ally rejects your leadership, rejects your moral authority, rejects your appeals to shared values. Your Epstein connection destroyed alliance cohesion, destroyed ability to build coalitions around moral principles, destroyed soft power needed for international leadership. You stand isolated. America stands isolated. Cannot lead when allies refuse to follow. Cannot threaten Africa with international pressure when international community refuses to apply pressure under your morally compromised leadership. Asian partners reject your authority identically. Japanese Prime Minister questions American credibility on human rights given Trump-Epstein files. South Korean President states ROK cannot support sanctions justified by moral principles violated by sanctioning nation's leader. Indian Prime Minister Modi publicly notes inconsistency between American human rights rhetoric and American president's trafficking network participation. Indonesian President Prabowo refuses ASEAN coordination on Africa sanctions citing American moral hypocrisy. Philippine President Marcos declines to align Manila with Washington Africa policy while Trump-Epstein association unresolved. Every Asian partner distances from your leadership, distances from your moral claims, distances from your policy initiatives. Your Epstein past destroyed Asian alliances same way it destroyed European alliances, destroyed ability to mobilize Asian support for Africa pressure, destroyed credibility needed to ask Asian nations to sacrifice their African economic relationships to support your retaliation against bank nationalizations. You cannot build global coalition when your past makes you untouchable for other leaders, makes association with you politically toxic, makes following your lead politically suicidal. Your 14 trips isolated America, isolated you, made international leadership impossible. Latin American governments reject your authority completely. Brazilian President Lula released statement January 9, 2026, declaring Brazil will not support any sanctions against African nations justified by human rights arguments from United States President whose participation in Epstein network is documented. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced Mexico stands with Africa against American financial imperialism and rejects moral lectures from leader compromised by pedophile island visits. Argentine President Javier Milei, despite pro-American orientation, stated Argentina cannot defend Trump moral authority given Epstein evidence. Colombian President Gustavo Petro described American Africa policy as hypocrisy from trafficking network participant. Chilean President Gabriel Boric declared Chile rejects American leadership on human rights while Trump-Epstein files remain unaddressed. Every major Latin American nation rejected your authority, rejected your moral standing, rejected your policy. Your Epstein connection destroyed Latin American relationships, destroyed hemispheric leadership, destroyed ability to mobilize Americas against Africa. You are isolated in your own hemisphere, cannot lead neighbors who see your past clearly and reject your present authority because of it. Middle Eastern allies distance identically. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stated privately, Saudi Arabia will not coordinate with Washington on Africa sanctions while American President's Epstein Association creates moral credibility questions. Statement delivered through Saudi Ambassador to United States January 8, 2026. Ambassador conveyed Crown Prince's position directly to Secretary of State. Position clear and unambiguous. Saudi Arabia will not participate in any coordinated pressure against African nations while Trump-Epstein files remain unaddressed, will not join sanctions regime, will not support diplomatic isolation efforts, will not coordinate economic pressure, will not align with American Africa policy. Crown Prince made decision based on calculation that associating Saudi Arabia with Trump moral crusade creates political liability, creates credibility questions for Saudi leadership, creates vulnerability to criticism about human rights hypocrisy. Crown Prince unwilling to accept that vulnerability, unwilling to defend Trump moral authority given Epstein documentation, unwilling to risk Saudi reputation by following Epstein compromised American leadership. Private statement reflected careful Saudi assessment that Trump-Epstein association makes him untouchable for allied coordination on human rights issues, makes American moral leadership toxic, makes following Washington on Africa sanctions politically suicidal. Saudi Arabia protects own interests by distancing from Trump-Africa policy completely. UAE leadership conveyed similar message through diplomatic channels. Emirati Foreign Minister met American counterpart Dubai January 9, 2026. Meeting intended to discuss Africa coordination. American delegation requested UAE support for sanctions, requested coordination on asset freezes, requested joint pressure against bank nationalizations. UAE response was negative. Foreign Minister stated clearly UAE will not participate, will not coordinate sanctions, will not join pressure campaign, will not align with American Africa policy while Trump moral authority remains compromised by Epstein association. Message conveyed diplomatically but firmly. UAE leadership calculated same risk as Saudi Arabia. Calculated that associating with Trump moral arguments creates political liability, creates vulnerability to hypocrisy charges, creates reputational damage. UAE unwilling to accept damage, unwilling to defend indefensible American moral position, unwilling to follow leadership destroyed by Epstein files. UAE protected own international standing by refusing coordination, by distancing from Trump policy, by declining to associate with morally compromised American crusade against Africa. Diplomatic channels carried unambiguous message. UAE will not follow Trump on Africa, period. Egyptian President Sisi publicly questioned American moral authority on governance issues given Trump personal history. Press conference Cairo, January 10, 2026. Journalist asked about American pressure regarding Africa sanctions, asked whether Egypt would coordinate with Washington. Sisi response was direct and public, stated Egypt questions American moral authority to lecture other nations about governance when American president's name appears on Epstein flight manifests 14 times, stated Egypt will not accept human rights guidance from leader whose human rights violations are documented, stated Egypt will not participate in sanctions justified by moral principles violated by sanctioning nation's leader. Sisi made statement publicly and deliberately, made it press conference statement ensuring wide coverage, made it clear Egyptian position rejecting American moral leadership. Sisi calculated that public rejection served Egyptian interests, demonstrated Egyptian independence from Washington, demonstrated Egyptian solidarity with Africa, demonstrated Egyptian refusal to accept Western double standards. Statement was diplomatic rebuke, was public distancing, was clear rejection of Trump authority. Egypt will not follow American Africa policy. Egypt will not accept Trump lectures about governance. Egypt sees Trump-Epstein association clearly and rejects his moral authority completely based on that association. Jordanian King Abdullah declined to support American Africa initiatives, citing regional concerns about American credibility. Private communication with White House, January 10, 2026. American officials requested Jordanian coordination on Africa sanctions, requested Jordan use influence with other Arab states to build regional support for pressure against African bank nationalizations. King Abdullah declined politely but firmly, stated Jordan cannot support initiatives justified by human rights arguments from administration whose leader's Epstein connection undermines credibility, stated Jordan faces regional concerns about American moral authority, stated Jordan cannot defend Trump moral leadership to other Arab nations given widespread knowledge of Epstein files, stated Jordan will not risk own regional standing by associating with morally compromised American policy. King Abdullah calculated that following Trump on Africa creates more problems than benefits, creates credibility questions for Jordan, creates vulnerability to criticism from regional partners, creates diplomatic complications Jordan cannot afford. King declined to accept those complications, declined to support policy he cannot defend regionally, declined to follow leadership he cannot justify to regional allies. Jordan will not coordinate on Africa sanctions, will not support American pressure, will not align with Trump policy. Regional concerns about American credibility made coordination impossible. Even Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, traditionally strongest American ally, expressed private reservations about defending Trump moral authority given Epstein files. Conversation with American officials, January 11, 2026. Netanyahu stated privately Israel faces difficulty defending American moral arguments while Trump-Epstein association remains prominent internationally. Stated Israeli government receives questions from European partners about supporting Trump given Epstein documentation. Stated Netanyahu personally faces criticism for close association with Trump, given widespread knowledge of 14 island visits. Netanyahu did not refuse coordination outright, did not reject American requests completely, but expressed reservations clearly, expressed concern about political cost of defending Trump moral authority, expressed worry about reputational damage from too close association with Epstein compromised leader. Netanyahu calculated that unlimited support for Trump Africa policy creates political problems, creates questions about Netanyahu's own judgment, creates vulnerability to criticism about defending indefensible American position. Netanyahu, traditionally most reliable American ally in region, expressed reservations, expressed concerns, expressed limits to support he can provide. Even strongest ally questions Trump moral authority, questions whether defending Trump on Epstein issues is politically sustainable, questions whether following Trump on Africa sanctions justified by human rights arguments is wise given Trump's own human rights violations documented in Epstein files. Even Netanyahu distances, even Israel hesitates, even closest ally questions Trump credibility. Your closest Middle Eastern partners distance from you. Saudi Arabia distances through private diplomatic communication, UAE distances through ministerial meetings, Egypt distances through public presidential statements, Jordan distances through polite declinations, Israel distances through expressed reservations. Every major Middle Eastern partner creates space between own position and American Africa policy, creates separation between own reputation and Trump moral authority, creates distance protecting own credibility from Trump-Epstein association, distance from your moral claims specifically, distance from human rights arguments you invoke, distance from rule of law principles you cite, distance from governance standards you mention, distance from democratic values you reference. Every partner recognizes you cannot credibly invoke those principles, cannot credibly make those arguments, cannot credibly claim moral authority. Every partner protects own standing by refusing to associate with your claims, refusing to support your arguments, refusing to defend your authority. Distance protects them. Distance preserves their credibility. Distance insulates them from your Epstein past. They distance because associating with you damages them, damages their reputations, damages their credibility, damages their international standing. Your Epstein association is toxic, makes you untouchable for coordination on moral issues, makes supporting you politically dangerous, makes defending you reputationally suicidal. Every partner sees this clearly. Every partner distances accordingly. Distance from your leadership specifically, not just from arguments but from you personally as leader. Saudi Arabia will not follow your leadership on Africa. UAE will not coordinate under your direction on sanctions. Egypt will not accept your guidance on regional policy. Jordan will not align with your initiatives on African pressure. Israel hesitates to support your crusades too enthusiastically. Every partner questions your leadership, questions whether following you serves their interests, questions whether you possess credibility needed to lead effectively, questions whether your Epstein past disqualifies you from moral leadership. Questions are answered affirmatively. Your Epstein association does disqualify you, does destroy your credibility, does make following you politically dangerous. Every partner reaches same conclusion. Cannot follow Epstein compromised leader on human rights crusade. Cannot defend Trump moral authority given 14 documented island visits. Cannot align with leadership destroyed by trafficking network participation. Your leadership is rejected. Not American leadership necessarily, your leadership specifically, your personal leadership undermined by your personal choices, your 14 trips, your Epstein association, your trafficking network participation. That destroys your leadership, makes you personally unable to lead Middle Eastern coordination, makes you personally toxic for regional partners, makes you personally impossible to follow on moral issues. They reject you, reject your leadership, reject your authority, personally, permanently. Your Epstein past destroyed Middle Eastern alliances, destroyed relationships built over decades, destroyed coordination mechanisms developed over years, destroyed trust established through previous administrations, destroyed everything in region. Saudi coordination impossible because Crown Prince will not defend your Epstein association. UAE cooperation impossible because Emirati leadership sees political liability. Egyptian partnership impossible because Sisi publicly rejected your moral authority. Jordanian alignment impossible because King Abdullah cannot justify following you regionally. Israeli support limited because Netanyahu faces criticism for too close association. Every alliance weakened, every relationship damaged, every partnership questioned, all because of your 14 trips to Epstein's Island, all because of your trafficking network participation, all because of your documented presence at location where minors were abused. Your choices destroyed alliances, your flights destroyed partnerships, your participation destroyed regional coordination. Middle East was traditionally strongest American alliance region, was most reliable region for American policy support, was region where American leadership was most accepted. Your Epstein past destroyed that, destroyed regional alliance cohesion, destroyed partnership reliability, destroyed leadership acceptance. Middle Eastern alliance is broken by your personal choices, by your 14 flights, by your Epstein association documented in manifests and witness statements and survivor testimony and photographs. You broke alliances, you destroyed partnerships, you killed regional coordination, your choices, your responsibility, your destruction, destroyed ability to coordinate regional pressure against Africa, cannot build regional coalition when regional partners refuse participation, cannot organize coordinated sanctions when Saudi Arabia declines, cannot implement joint asset freezes when UAE refuses, cannot coordinate diplomatic pressure when Egypt publicly questions your authority, cannot mobilize regional support when Jordan cites credibility concerns, cannot rely on unlimited Israeli backing when even Netanyahu expresses reservations. Regional pressure requires regional coordination. Regional coordination requires regional leadership acceptance. Regional leadership acceptance requires credibility. You have no credibility. Your Epstein past destroyed it. Your 14 trips eliminated it. Your trafficking network participation killed it permanently. Cannot coordinate regional pressure without credibility. Cannot build coalition without leadership acceptance. Cannot mobilize Middle East against Africa when Middle East rejects your moral authority. Regional pressure is impossible. Regional coordination is dead. Regional alliance utility is destroyed. All because of Epstein. All because of those 14 flights. All because of your choices that disqualified you from leading regional coordination on human rights issues. You destroyed regional pressure capability, destroyed it through personal choices, destroyed it permanently through trafficking network participation. Middle East will not follow you against Africa, will not coordinate sanctions, will not join pressure campaign, will not support your crusade. Regional pressure is impossible because you made it impossible through your Epstein association. Destroyed credibility needed to ask authoritarian allies to join democratic human rights crusade led by leader whose own human rights violations are documented. Irony is obvious to everyone. You want authoritarian Middle Eastern allies to support democratic human rights crusade against Africa, want Saudi Arabia with its human rights record to join pressure justified by human rights principles, want UAE with its governance issues to support campaign based on governance standards, want Egypt with its democracy deficits to participate in democratic values crusade, want Jordan with its authoritarian structure to align with human rights initiative. Authoritarian allies see irony clearly, see that you ask them to risk criticism about their human rights records to support crusade led by leader whose own human rights violations are documented in Epstein files. Ask them to defend principles they do not fully embrace to support leader who violated those principles. Ask them to accept reputational damage to advance policy led by person with worse reputational damage. Authoritarian allies decline because asking them to support human rights crusade led by Epstein Island visitor is politically absurd, is diplomatically impossible, is reputationally suicidal. They cannot explain to their populations why they support Trump human rights arguments, cannot explain to regional partners why they defend Trump moral authority, cannot explain to international community why they align with Epstein compromised leadership on moral crusade, cannot explain any of it. So they decline, they distance, they refuse. Your ask was impossible. Your request was unreasonable. Your demand was politically absurd. You wanted authoritarian allies to support democratic crusade led by trafficking participant. Nobody could do that. Nobody would risk that. Nobody accepted that political suicide mission. Your credibility is so destroyed that even authoritarian allies with their own credibility problems refuse to associate with your moral arguments. That is how badly your Epstein past destroyed you. Even allies with questionable records refuse to defend your record. Even partners with credibility issues refuse to support your credibility. Even authoritarian governments refuse to join your human rights crusade. You are that compromised, that destroyed, that toxic. You are isolated globally now. Europe rejects your moral authority. Germany refuses coordination. France declines participation. UK will not support sanctions. Italy distances from policy. Spain refuses alignment. Every major European ally rejects you. Asia rejects your authority identically. Japan questions American credibility. South Korea declines support. India notes hypocrisy publicly. Indonesia refuses ASEAN coordination. Philippines will not align Manila with Washington policy. Every Asian partner distances from you. Latin America rejects your authority completely. Brazil opposes sanctions explicitly. Mexico stands with Africa against you. Argentina, despite pro-American orientation, will not defend your moral authority. Colombia describes your policy as hypocrisy. Chile rejects your leadership on human rights. Every major Latin American nation refuses your guidance. Middle East rejects your authority now too. Saudi Arabia will not coordinate. UAE refuses participation. Egypt questions your credibility publicly. Jordan declines initiatives citing your reputation. Israel expresses reservations about defending you. Every Middle Eastern partner distances from your leadership. Every region globally rejects you. Every alliance questions you. Every partner refuses you. Global isolation complete. Every region rejects your authority based on same reason, based on your Epstein files, based on your 14 trips to Trafficking Island, based on your participation in network that abused minors, based on manifests showing your name on passenger lists, based on witness statements describing your presence, based on survivor testimony detailing your actions, based on photographs proving your participation, based on evidence documenting your choices over 8-year period. Every region sees same evidence. Every alliance draws same conclusion. Trump cannot lead moral crusade. Trump cannot invoke human rights principles. Trump cannot lecture others about governance. Trump cannot threaten nations based on democratic values. Trump is disqualified by his own documented violations. Every region reaches identical judgment. Every alliance makes same calculation. Every partner distances for same reason. Your Epstein association destroyed you globally. Destroyed your leadership everywhere, destroyed your authority in every region, universal rejection, universal distancing, universal refusal to follow your morally compromised leadership, global isolation based on personal choices, based on 14 flights, based on trafficking network participation, based on crimes you committed and tried to ignore while lecturing others about morality. World sees crimes clearly, world judges you accordingly, world rejects you completely. Every alliance questions your leadership now, questions whether you possess judgment needed to lead, questions whether your personal choices reflect character suitable for leadership, questions whether trafficking network participation disqualifies you from moral authority, questions whether 14 trips to abuse location prove unfitness for office, questions whether Epstein association demonstrates compromised decision-making, questions whether your continued denial show honesty deficit, questions everything about your fitness to lead. Every alliance questions, every partner doubts, every relationship includes fundamental questioning about whether you should be followed at all. Questioning destroys leadership effectiveness, destroys ability to mobilize support, destroys capacity to coordinate actions, destroys power to build coalitions. Leadership requires trust, requires confidence, requires belief that leader possesses judgment and character and credibility. You possess none. Your Epstein association destroyed trust. Your 14 flights destroyed confidence. Your trafficking participation destroyed belief in your character. Alliances question everything about you now. Question openly, question constantly, question fundamentally. Your leadership is questioned so thoroughly that leadership becomes impossible. Cannot lead when every partner questions your fitness. Cannot coordinate when every alliance doubts your judgment. Cannot mobilize when every relationship includes fundamental questioning about whether you should be followed. Leadership is dead, killed by questioning, killed by doubts, killed by Epstein association that makes questioning and doubting rational and permanent. Every partner distances from your policies specifically because policies are justified by moral arguments you cannot credibly make. Africa policy depends on moral authority, depends on credibly invoking human rights, depends on successfully arguing that bank nationalizations violate international norms, depends on convincing partners that Africa threatens values requiring coordinated defense. Moral arguments are necessary, moral authority is required, moral credibility is essential. You possess none. Your Epstein past destroyed moral authority, your 14 trips destroyed moral credibility, your trafficking participation destroyed capacity to make moral arguments. Partners recognize this immediately. Recognize you cannot credibly invoke human rights you violated, cannot credibly cite rule of law you broke, cannot credibly defend democratic values you betrayed, cannot credibly make arguments your personal history destroys. Partners distance from policies because policies depend on credibility you lack, depend on authority you lost, depend on moral standing you destroyed through personal choices. Policies are dead on arrival because you cannot make arguments supporting policies, cannot invoke principles justifying policies, cannot claim authority implementing policies. Every partner sees this. Every alliance recognizes this. Every relationship includes understanding that your Epstein association killed your Africa policy before policy launched. Partners distance from dead policy, distance from failed initiative, distance from crusade doomed by leaders' personal destruction of own moral authority. Your policies are rejected not because policies are wrong necessarily, rejected because you lack credibility to advance policies, lack authority to lead policies, lack standing to justify policies. You killed your own policies through personal choices years before policies were conceived, killed them with 14 flights to Trafficking Island, killed them with participation in network now exposed and condemned. Your Epstein past killed your Africa present, killed your policies, killed your initiatives, killed your crusades. Partners distance from corpse of your policy, distance from wreckage of your authority, distance from ruins of your credibility, all destroyed by your choices, your flights, your participation, your crimes. Your 14 trips to Epstein's Island accomplished this global isolation, accomplished this universal rejection, accomplished this complete destruction of your international leadership. 14 trips over 8 years between February 1997 and August 2005 destroyed everything. Destroyed European alliances, destroyed Asian partnerships, destroyed Latin American relationships, destroyed Middle Eastern coordination, destroyed global leadership position, destroyed moral authority, destroyed credibility, destroyed everything. 14 trips accomplished complete destruction of your capacity to lead internationally on human rights issues. 14 documented flights to Little St. James, where Jeffrey Epstein trafficked minors, accomplished annihilation of your moral standing globally, made you internationally toxic, made you untouchable for allied coordination, made you impossible to follow on moral crusades, made you ineffective as international leader. made you isolated globally, made you rejected universally, made you worthless as partner, made you liability rather than asset, made you damaged goods nobody wants to associate with, made you ruined leader whose personal past destroys present policy, made you permanent cautionary tale about how personal crimes destroy public authority. 14 trips accomplished all of this. Your choices accomplished total destruction. Your participation accomplished permanent isolation. Your trafficking network involvement accomplished irreversible annihilation of international leadership capacity. Made you internationally toxic specifically. Toxic means nobody wants to touch you, nobody wants to associate with you, nobody wants to coordinate with you, nobody wants to defend you, nobody wants to follow you, nobody wants to support you, nobody wants anything to do with you. You are toxic, poisonous, dangerous to associate with, politically suicidal to support, reputationally destructive to defend. Partners understand this immediately. Understand associating with Epstein Island visitor damages them. Understand defending trafficking participant destroys their credibility. Understand following compromise leader on moral crusade is political suicide. Partners protect themselves by distancing, by refusing association, by declining coordination, by rejecting your leadership. Protection is necessary because you are toxic. Your Epstein association is poison. Your 14 trips are political death. Partners who associate with you get contaminated, get damaged, get destroyed. They avoid contamination by avoiding you. They preserve credibility by rejecting you. They protect standing by distancing from you. You are toxic internationally, globally rejected, universally avoided. Nobody wants you. Nobody will follow you. Nobody accepts your leadership. Toxic is permanent condition, cannot be cleaned, cannot be removed, cannot be overcome. 14 trips made you permanently toxic, permanently untouchable, permanently isolated, permanently worthless as international leader. That is what your Epstein association accomplished. Total destruction of international utility, complete elimination of leadership value, permanent creation of toxic political figure nobody will associate with. Made American leadership impossible under you specifically, not American leadership generally, American leadership under your presidency specifically. Under different president, American leadership could function, could mobilize alliances, could coordinate partners, could lead coalitions. Under you specifically, leadership is impossible. Impossible because you personally are compromised. You personally are toxic. You personally lack credibility. You personally destroyed moral authority through personal choices. You personally took 14 flights. You personally participated in trafficking network. You personally created Epstein association that disqualifies you personally from moral leadership. Problem is you personally, not America necessarily. You, your choices, your flights, your participation, your past. You made American leadership impossible by becoming president while possessing disqualifying Epstein association. Made it impossible for allies to follow American lead because American lead comes from you, comes from Epstein Island visitor, comes from trafficking participant, comes from person who took 14 documented flights to abuse location. Allies cannot follow that leader, cannot defend that person, cannot associate with that past. Your personal destruction destroyed American leadership capacity. Your personal toxicity made American coordination impossible. Your personal choices killed American alliance cohesion. America cannot lead under you, cannot mobilize partners under your direction, cannot coordinate pressure under your authority. You personally destroyed American international leadership through personal crimes committed years before presidency, crimes that disqualified you from leadership, crimes that should have prevented presidency, crimes that now prevent effective governance internationally. You destroyed American leadership. You made coordination impossible. You killed alliance utility, personally, through personal choices, through personal crimes, through personal 14 trips to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking island. Made your Africa threats unenforceable because you cannot build coalition needed to enforce them. Threats without enforcement are worthless noise. Empty words meaning nothing. Threats require credible enforcement capability, require capacity to implement threatened consequences, require coalition support making consequences real. You cannot build coalition, cannot mobilize partners, cannot coordinate enforcement, cannot make threats real. Threats remain empty words because you personally lack credibility to build enforcement coalition. Europe refuses coordination because of your Epstein files. Asia declines participation because of your 14 trips. Latin America rejects your authority because of your trafficking association. Middle East distances from your leadership because of your documented crimes. Every region refuses enforcement participation. Every alliance declines coordination. Every partner rejects your initiative. Cannot build coalition without partners. Cannot enforce threats without coalition, cannot make consequences real without enforcement capability. Your Epstein past destroyed coalition building capacity, destroyed enforcement capability, destroyed threat credibility. Threats are empty because you cannot build a coalition. Coalition is impossible because you are toxic. Toxicity is permanent because of 14 flights. Flights are documented permanently in federal records. Your threats against Africa are unenforceable. Unenforceable because coalition is impossible. Coalition is impossible because you destroyed your own credibility through personal crimes. Your Africa threats are worthless noise, empty words from a compromised leader, meaningless sounds from trafficking participants, ineffective bluster from a person who lost enforcement capability through personal choices years before the threat began. Your threats mean nothing, accomplish nothing, frighten nobody, change nothing. Worthless completely because you destroyed your own capacity to enforce through the Epstein association that made coalition building impossible. You lost this fight before it started, lost it years before the fight was conceived, lost it before you knew this fight would exist, lost it before Africa nationalized banks, lost it before Continental Banking Union was imagined, lost it before you became president, lost it February 12, 1997 when you took the first flight to Little St. James. That flight lost a fight. That choice destroyed future credibility. That trip eliminated future capacity to lead international coordination on human rights issues. First flight began your destruction. First trip started your disqualification. First visit to Epstein Island initiated a process ending in complete inability to threaten Africa effectively. Decades later, you lost this fight February 12, 1997, lost it permanently, lost it irreversibly. First flight sealed your fate regarding future Africa policy, sealed it by destroying moral authority needed for that policy, sealed it by creating disqualifying association, sealed it by documenting choice that would later destroy your credibility completely when exposed publicly. One flight began destruction, first trip initiated permanent loss.